If you've been with us, we've been in a series, and it's been called Dark Side of the Moon. And Kyle was talking about it a little bit, but specifically, we just really feel that God is on the move in our church family. We feel that He is in the process of setting us free from some stuff because of what He's releasing us into. And so there's kind of this, we're doing it as a family, there's this individual piece of this of we've got to walk this out for ourselves. And so last week, at least 20 individuals by Monday morning, I heard, had stepped into our counseling process and basically said from last week, hey, I need help. And they're in that process now of hopefully moving towards healing. And I love that we can be a place where it's okay for people to go, hey, I'm not okay, I need some help, and that's okay. And then the other thing that I love about our family is how some of you stepped up last week and said, hey, I will scholarship somebody to that because I know how important it is. And many of you stepped up and generously just went, hey, I'll be a part of this and I want to give towards this. So thank you for that. That was last week. And again, those are individual decisions. And this week, I believe with everything I have, that if you will enter in and you will allow Jesus, He will lead you to freedom today. I believe that today could be pivotal in your walk with Jesus. And we're kind of rallying around Psalm 139 for this series. And Psalm 139 verse 23 says this, search me, God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me and lead me in the way everlasting. Today, we're going to lean into that. See if there's any offensive way in me. Is there anything today that is harmful in me? Is there any way that before God that is within me that is both offensive to Him but harmful to me? God, would you show me those things today? And so we're going to lean into that and kind of framing it up inside of the dark side of the moon. There is this reality, and we've been using it for weeks now, of this side-by-side image we have of the moon, of the front side of the moon, and also the far side of the moon, what we're calling the dark side of the moon. That if you've been with us, you know that what you see on the right side of this image, you have never seen with your eyes when you have looked at the moon, because it is stuck on the other side because it's tidally locked with the earth, which means that we only see one side of the moon. And so we've kind of been working through together this reality. I love that this thing shakes, by the way, when you walk around it. Makes it feel real good. But just a reality of with the dark side of the moon, that a lot of us, we act like the moon in that we only let people see the good side of us. We only let people see what we want them to see. And yet there's a reality to all of us because we were born onto a broken planet. We were born as broken people, that the reality is that somewhere in your life, either you have harmed someone out of your brokenness or you have been harmed by someone out of their brokenness. But the bottom line is that these craters that we find on the dark side of the moon from impacts and from things that have happened, the reality is that for all of us on our soul, we have these moments of impact. We have these moments that life has given us. And so walking through and just beginning to recognize that God wants to reach into those areas of your life, that God wants to get in the middle of your brokenness that's been done to you and by you and bring healing and forgiveness. That God's on a journey of freedom for us as a family. And it reminds me of this rocket. Now, what is here? It's actually made out of Lego, believe it or not. It is 1,969 Legos that make this thing. That is not wasted on me because Apollo 11 went in 1969 to the moon. So somebody's a little genius there. They're like, we need one more piece to make it work. But the reality is of this rocket, if this rocket is going to go to the moon like it did, then the Saturn V has stages to it. And what I mean is this, that if you weren't nervous before, you should be getting nervous now. Because if it hits the floor, there will be many pieces. So But the reality is it was built in stages because for it to complete its mission, it was going to have to do certain things at certain stages. And so stage one, if I can make this work, stage one was this bottom part. But stage one was only designed to get you 42 miles off the planet. There was 5.5 million pounds in stage one. And so as this rocket launches, this piece right here, stage one, only gets you 42 miles, which then after that releases and falls back to the ocean, stage two kicks in, and stage two carries you to about 115 miles off the planet before stage two gets dropped into the ocean. And now you've got stage three propelling the rocket essentially out and on its way towards the moon, which at some point on that journey, stage three drops off. And that doesn't come back to Earth. That's out there somewhere, just flying around. So what happens then is once that drops off, you end up with this, the CMS modular that would propel you to the moon. But before it did that, what would happen is this would go back into stage three, pick up the lunar module, and you would head towards the moon. Then once they'd been to the moon and they were on the way back, at some point it would jettison and you would get down to this. This is the splashdown module that's used to return humans to Earth. What's fascinating about this, the image on screen is the one that was used in Apollo 8, but what's fascinating about this is that this is 0.19% of what took off from the Earth. For the mission to be successful, to go to the moon and return those humans back, they had to lose most of what they were carrying. And I wonder for you and for me, if we're not supposed to be a lot like this rocket. That if you are going to be all that God has called you to be, if you are going to be everything that you were created to be in Jesus, then you have to let go of the dead weight. Title for this sermon, you gotta let go. Right? Ba-da-bop, best dad joke in the house. There you go. But you gotta let go. You gotta let go. You have to let go if you are going to be successful in what God has called you to. That for you and for me, just like a mission with a rocket to the moon and back, they had to shed amazing amounts of weight. And I wonder how many of us are weighed down today by things like insecurity and things like resentment and bitterness and anger and hatred and ego. That you were never meant to be. If we go back to the Psalms context, it's like, no, in God's eyes, those are things that are offensive to him. That his children would carry unforgiveness. Why? Because on the cross, he paid for forgiveness. That we would be dispensers of grace. And I love the imagery that's found in Matthew chapter 8. Matthew chapter 8, there's a story. The context of the story is that Jesus has been given a sermon, right? And you may have heard of it. They call it the Sermon on the Mount or the Sermon on the Mountainside. And reality is that Jesus has been teaching, and he's been teaching on all kinds of things. He starts out with, hey, this group of people is blessed. And then he moves on quickly to worry. And then he gets into things like adultery and divorce. And then he moves into loving your enemies. And then he moves from there into other topics like prayer and fasting and giving. And then he moves into being a wise builder. And if we were listening to that sermon today, we'd be like, man, he was all over the place. What was his theme that he was trying to capture it all in? And his theme would have been this, that this is life in the kingdom of God. And as he gives this message and he talks about what it's like to live in the kingdom and how we should interact within the kingdom of God as people of the kingdom of God. Verse 1 of chapter 8 picks up like this. When Jesus came down from the mountainside, so he just gets done preaching, large crowds followed him. So the crowd follows him down. Inside of that crowd, you would have all kinds of people. You would have had the rich with the poor. You would have had the healed with the sick. You would have had different ethnicities. You would have had different social classes. You would have had people that were there just because, hey, I heard he feeds people for free, so I'm here for the free meal. And then you would have had people that were also there going, hey, I'm giving my life to this guy. This guy is my rabbi, my teacher, and I'm going to follow him. So you had people that were very, very wide in their beliefs. You had people that were wide in their life experience, and they are part of this crowd that's coming down with him. Verse 2, a man with leprosy came and knelt before him and said, Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. A man with leprosy came and knelt before him. What so one translation captures with this is it says, suddenly a man with leprosy came. And what we miss in our translation is this, that this moment was like a shock. That if you were there, you're like, how'd that happen? Why? Because a man with leprosy, what was common in that day and age, that if you had this skin disease called leprosy, and it would literally eat you piece by piece, it would rot your flesh away until eventually you died from this. There was no cure. That if you had this disease and you existed then, the way you went around is you would walk from space to space by going, unclean, unclean, unclean. Why? To let you know, don't come near me, because if you come near me, you will become contaminated. If you come near me, you're going to have this skin-eating disease that I have, you're going to get it. So stay away from me. I'm contaminated. And what you get in this picture is you get this man who he ends up kneeling before Jesus. How did he get there? I tell you what, he didn't get there by coming along going, unclean, unclean. In fact, easy. In fact, what I envision is this, that he's got a hoodie, and that hoodie is up. And you can barely see his face, maybe just his eyes. He's got long sleeves, and his robe is all the way down to the ground. Why? Because he wants to make sure that no one sees who he really is. He's coming hidden into the presence of Jesus. I catch so much imagery in this story. Because when I think about things like resentment and anger and hatred and unforgiveness and bitterness and ego, what all of those things remind me of is something that is eating you alive. Just like this disease. And for too many of us, we got a dark side to the moon that we don't let anybody see. We think we're hiding it, but the only way we're hiding it is like this guy who's got his hoodie up and his robe, and he's like, man, I'm going to cover up as much as I can. And so you walk into church and all we see is your eyes. And yet he's in front of Jesus. He made it in front of Jesus. He comes hidden into that space. But I love what he does next. Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. What he does in this moment is yeah, he may have come hidden, but there's a moment where he goes in humility, in honesty, in vulnerability. Lord, I am exposing myself for who I really am to you, Jesus. And as I expose myself to Jesus, I'm doing it in a space that I'm becoming vulnerable because I'm going to give you all control. Lord, if you are willing, you can make me clean. He stopped hiding. He may have hidden to get in front of Jesus, but when he gets in front of Jesus, he's humble and he's transparent. And he goes, this is who I am. And Lord, if you're willing. And Jesus' response, Jesus reached out his hand, verse 3, Jesus reached out his hand and touched the man. You realize what just happened there, right? Wait a minute, he's got a skin-eating disease. And Jesus, you know the law of nature, right? The law of nature is that things that are unclean, when they touch something that's clean, that thing that was clean becomes what? Unclean. You know how I know this works? I worked out this week, right? And I'm all sweaty because cardio doesn't work on me. I was all sweaty. And I was like, I'm going to go mess with my wife because that's what you do, right? So I go up to Cindy and she's sitting in a chair and she's like, don't you dare. I'm like, well, now you just dared me. So, So I get closer and I put my hand on her chair and it was on her blanket. And she's like, you made it all dirty. And I'm like, babe, my hand's not sweating. She goes, it is, I can feel it. And, but that's the law of nature, right? The things that are unclean, when they touch something that's clean, they make it unclean. And what you have in this moment is you have Jesus in this intimate moment where this person is vulnerable before him. I want you to catch this because we miss it. That when you are in your most humble, vulnerable state before Jesus, you need to know that what he is back to you is intimate and caring. You know how I know Jesus didn't have to touch this person to heal him? The very next story, he heals by a word. I mean, think about it. This guy's a leper. When was the last time he was touched by another human? And our Jesus, in a moment when this person is at their most vulnerable, reaches in and touches the man. It's beautiful. I wonder if you were willing to be vulnerable this morning. I wonder if you were willing to be humble before Jesus, if you would experience that what Jesus wants to do is reach in and touch your soul. That space that is the darkest, that space that you've been carrying for a while, that space that you're holding resentment and bitterness, that's actually the space he wants to heal today. I love that the words Jesus used is verse 3, I am willing, he said. Be clean. I am willing. Be clean. Why you have to say it loud? Because there's an exclamation point. Got to read it like it is. But I am willing. What do you learn about Jesus in this moment? I am willing, be clean. Immediately the man was cleansed of his leprosy. What happens when you get before Jesus and you're vulnerable and I'm honest and Jesus, this is where I am. This is the ugly. This is me. What you find in Jesus is he goes, hey, I want to take you from your broken and lead you to freedom. How do I know that that's what Jesus is up to? Because there is a cross that is stained red for all of human history. And then on top of that, there's a grave that he was buried in. And that grave is empty today, which tells me that he conquered death, which means that he conquered brokenness, which means for you and for me today, that when we're in front of him with our brokenness, you need to know your brokenness was already paid for. He's already paid for it. It's done and gone. And what he has given you and what he is leading you to is freedom. He's leading you to new life right here, right now. Because those things that are holding you and eating away at your soul like a flesh-eating disease, those things that are eating away at you, he died to set you free from. I know that today you're not supposed to carry that. Where's this thing going? When you met Jesus, God is in the process then of making you like Jesus. But here's what I know. Well, you exist on this planet, you're not there yet. I'm not there yet. When you breathe your last breath and you get a glorified body, okay, now you're there. Or when Jesus comes back. But until that point, we are works in progress. We are works in progress. We're nothing but a bunch of lepers. And we're coming before Jesus going, hey, if you're willing, I'm going to put all my cards in your camp. If you're willing, you can make a change. And he says, be clean, I'm willing. Then Jesus said to him, see that you don't tell anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded as a testimony to them. I love verse 4. You know why? Because he sends the leper to the church people. And what's he supposed to do when he gets there? Be a witness to the church people. What are we supposed to be for one another? We're supposed to be witnesses. We're supposed to be people that are in each other's lives. And we should be these people that go, hey, I got to tell you my story. Because my story tells you about this Jesus, and this Jesus set me free. So everywhere we go, there should be this connection of we can't wait to tell our story. We should be a group of people that should be encouraging each other. How? Yes, by the story we find on these pages, but what makes those stories real is what happens in your life and in mine. When Jesus shows up, when we are as the leper and we are vulnerable and we go, hey, I am in a space where, Lord, if you're willing, and the testimony is I'm willing. Now what's crazy is this leper was supposed to go to the priest. And when he got to the priest, he was supposed to take 2 birds. The first bird they would kill and run underwater. I know it's a little weird. They would run it underwater, right? The second bird they would keep alive, but they would soak it in the blood of the dead bird. And then they would take some of that blood, put it on the leper's ear, the leper's hand, and the leper's foot. And then they would take the live bird and set it free. So aren't you glad today that when you find healing and forgiveness today and freedom, that you don't have to come back with 2 birds later? Like, let's just call it what it is. But you know why that is, right? We don't have to come back because once and for all, Jesus sealed the deal. Once and for all, Jesus stood in our place. It's a one and done. We don't come back because he is enough. And we have to find him to be enough where? In the darkest part of our soul. And what's amazing is that this man goes from hidden to, hey, you can go stand in full sight and tell everybody what's happened. And it's beautiful. And I love that God puts us in a family. And I love that in a family we get to hang out together, we get to hear each other's stories, we get to walk alongside one another. And there's some people that are dear to me. There's some friends of mine that I would love to invite up to stage. So Charlie and Kathy, if you want to make your way up, I will make a disclaimer as they're making their way up. The story you're about to hear and what we're about to walk through is a little intense in places. And it's wrapped around some domestic violence. And so just warning you, my wife told me after last night, she's like, you didn't warn us, and I got my kiddos in the room, right? And so I'm just warning you, it's my kids were fine. I asked them about it last night. They were fine with it. But would you do me a favor? Would you welcome Charlie and Kathy? I met Charlie and Kathy in 2008, I believe it was. And I've got to journey alongside with them. Charlie is actually one of our elders at the church. And having heard their story, it's been this journey for me of someday we got to tell that. Someday we got to tell that. And God, for whatever reason, it's just never been there until this weekend. So I couldn't be more excited to have you guys. I couldn't be more excited for everybody to get to know you and hear what God's done. But Kathy, why don't you kick us off with where are you from and how'd you end up in Prescott?
My name is Kathy Kuhn, and this guy is Charlie. I was born back in Massachusetts and grew up in San Luis Obispo, California. Charlie was born in Spokane and grew up in Cambria, California, part of it. And that's where we met. And we met in high school. We've been married for 47 years, and we've been a couple for 51. So we've kind of grown each other up. We moved.
High school sweethearts.
Yeah. We moved here from Hemet, California in 2008.
It's amazing. Charlie, so that's how quick version of who you are, where you came to. Walk us through, because it's pivotal in your story, walk us through some of those early years for you and what shaped you leading up to 2005.
Sure. So the first 9 years of my life was great with my parents, and I grew up a normal kid, played baseball. When at age 9, we moved from Spokane to Southern California. My father was transferred. He worked for the Air Force. And my folks got a divorce. And the stepdad that I ended up with was a very violent alcoholic that didn't really bargain for me in the deal, but I was stuck. And so from from that point, I lived from the time I was 9 till I was 13 with someone that would get drunk and then we'd fight and he beat me up. And so I got tired of it, and I had a lot of hate in my heart, and I was very isolated. I really depended on friends. A friend invited me to church, and that's when I first was exposed to church, and I found an escape, and it was wonderful. When I was 13, I'd had enough, and I came home. He was drunk. I went in the bedroom. I had a wrench about that big, and I stood on the bed, and when he came through the door, I hit him on the head. I tried to kill him. That was my mission. He dropped like a sack of potatoes, and I thought I had accomplished it, and I was happy. Mom wasn't so happy. I thought it'd make her happy, but it didn't, and Mom came in, and she understood, but I knew at that point that I was no longer welcome. So at 13, I left home. Called my dad, said, "Dad, I just tried to kill John, and I need a place to go." So he welcomed me. He was a bachelor. He never remarried. So we bachelored together from the time I was 13 till I was 18. And that was in Cambria. He worked nights and I went wild. But during that time, I met this lady, and it straightened me out. So that's when, at that point.
So from there, then you end up in the military.
Yep.
What was that journey like?
So I, at 18, the 2 days after I turned 18, I was in the Air Force. I went off to boot camp and was trained in working, loading cargo on planes and a loadmaster. I was in Vietnam for the end of, or Southeast Asia for the end of the Vietnam War. I got there in 74 and 75 in Cambodia, Phnom Penh, Cambodia for the fall, Saigon 3 days before it fell. And then the last operation of the Vietnam War was something called the Maiguez operation. It was U.S. freighter that was taken on the open sea by Khmer Rouge. And we were tasked at our base to rescue them. So I'd just been bowling with a bunch of security cops that night. We got alerted, went out to the airport, loaded 3 helicopters, CH-53s, Jolly Green Giants, with troops, with our guys. And the last one was Knife 13, call sign. And I thought I was going with them. Just before we left, my sergeant pulled me off, said, "You're staying, we've got another wave going, I need your help." So I said, okay. I waved, gave thumbs up to the guys on that bird, and told them to kick some butt for me, and they took off. 10 minutes later, they took a rocket and went down. I lost 23 guys.
So sorry.
I struggled with guilt. I should have been on that airplane. Glad I wasn't on that airplane, and it was awful. It was really a confusion. But the saving grace was God and knowing that the next month I was coming home to marry her. And that was it.
It's a pretty good thing to return home to.
Yeah.
Yeah. Charlie, thank you for can we thank Charlie for his service? I love you, Charlie. So you'd mentioned part of that story was, you get back and then PTSD is something you got to navigate through. The survivor's guilt is something you got to navigate through. Walk us through a little bit, just real quick, what that was like.
So I came back from when it was over. I came back, and shortly after I got back to the U.S., I was stationed at McCord Air Base. I took a really bad fall unloading a cargo plane, and jet engine fell on me, and I was injured pretty badly. It developed later, and I became disabled, and the Air Force kicked me out, which really hurt. I wanted to make a career forever. But I got out and went to college. Kathy and I raised 3 kids, 2 boys and a girl. My boys, one boy lives in Prescott Valley and the other one in Colorado. My daughter, the youngest, was Jessica. And Jessica was born in 1980. I delivered her. I actually delivered her. The doc said, "Can you do this?" I said, "Yes," and I delivered her. So she was special. And so that was good. And we raised the kids, but I was very isolated. I had trouble. Did I do something wrong?
I don't think so.
Thank you, Lord. So I really had trouble with nightmares, and I was damaged. But I really tried to be normal, raise the kids, but I definitely had PTSD. So it was.
You said from, if I remember right, that from when you lost the guys, you hadn't cried.
No. Once
life.
I lost that's how we really figured out I had PTSD. I mean, they weren't treating you for that anymore, or at that time, but I never cried. I lost both parents. They both died. Kathy's parents died. We lost friends and relatives, and I never cried. I didn't have any emotion. I was stuck, and that wasn't normal.
So then 2005 hits, and that was monumental for your life journey.
2005, we had left the Vancouver area, transferred down to Fresno, lived in Fresno, worked for the airline there, and one evening in 2005, got a call, and it was a police officer in Portland, Oregon, and he said, "Your daughter's been murdered." And man, that I said, "What? What about?" And she had our granddaughter, who was born in 2005.
So she was 5 at that point, your
Yeah,
granddaughter,
yeah,
Linnea?
she was 5. And I said, "What about her?" And they said, "No, we have her in child custody or child care, and Dad's in jail." And so, I said, "Well, what happened?" And they said, "Well, her partner, he beat her to death. It was brutal." I said, "How?" He said, "She's been arrested for 11 counts of murder." I said, "Who else did he murder?" They said, "No, it was the beating was so bad she would have died in 11 ways." And that was and so that, I was devastated. So that was the first time I cried in 30 years. And boy, did I cry.
And so you get this news, it's horrific, the 11 counts. I mean, so it's settling in, and I think there's such a beautiful part of your story with the police chaplain who helped you navigate those early days.
Right.
That even, trying to help you understand the journey you were going to go on. But obviously at that point, you're dealing now with anger, hatred, resentment, unforgiveness. I mean, it's all just imploded at once. Kathy, maybe walk us through, so you're now sitting in that reality. What does that journey look like for you? I know when we talked, you'd mentioned, your mind is very artsy and you see pictures, and walk us through that part of the journey for you of dealing with the aftermath.
When we got that news that nobody ever expects to get, Charlie dropped like a rock. And to see a big, strong man, a warrior, a soldier, drop to his knees was devastating. And my PTSD from that event was different than his. I have a an artsy personality, I guess you could say. And so even though I did not view Jessica at the memorial home to say goodbye, because I knew she wouldn't want me to see her that way, I knew what he had done. I knew the damage that he had done to her, how he had just destroyed her. And so with each of those things that he did, my mind created a picture for it. So I could see it. I could see the act and I could see the damage in my head. And so now I have all these 11 pictures or 12 pictures or whatever they are for all these different things. And they just started like a video in my head, just wouldn't go away. The only time I got any reprieve from it was to go to sleep, and then I would wake up and it would start all over again. And this went on for 3 or 4 years.
Wow.
Until we moved here.
Yeah. And so, Charlie, while Kathy's got mental images going, yours is growing into hatred and revenge. Walk us through just a couple of those thoughts that you had.
Sure. So from 2005, when it happened, till 2010, I never slept through the night. I had so much hatred in my heart. I wanted to exact revenge, and I can't lie. I killed him in many, many different ways. I got to the point where I even tried to find out what I could do that wasn't severe enough to keep me forever, but to get me into the prison, arrested, get in the prison so that I could get to him in prison. I just wanted to kill him. And the things that I would have done to him were very ugly. So the hatred, I have got to tell you, if you've got something for somebody, it will eat you. And it ate me up and ate me up. And not being able to forgive was something terrible.
So then we fast forward to 2008. You're now in Prescott, Arizona, and attending Heights Church. And walk us through then that journey of finding forgiveness and what that looked like.
Sure. So, like I said, I came and looked at my buddy that I was in the Air Force with lived in Prescott, and my job went away in Hemet, where we worked. I worked for DHL, and they closed the doors and left the country, and all of us were out of work. And so I called my buddy Chris, and I said, "Hey, Chris, I just lost my job." He said, "Great, move to Prescott. We'll grow old, tell lies, and drink beer together." And I said, "Works for me." And that was about the basis of why we moved here. And so I came over on a recon trip, end of October, beginning of November, and started scoping the place out, looking for work and looking for a place to live. And we met some wonderful people. I came one Sunday, I was watching football, and God was just nudging me. And one Sunday in November, I came to Heights Church and sat and listened to the message. And he said, "This is home." So we met Jack and Dee. They were wonderful people. They invited us to Thanksgiving dinner here, strangers, and from California. And they invited us to come out and have dinner, and we just really found a home. And I told Kath, this is our place. So we came here, and in 2010, we're sitting in the front row and listening to the message. I'm still haven't slept through the night, still hateful. And the pastor at that time said that he had a different sermon set up, but today God told him to talk about surrender and forgiveness. Man, the message was devastating. It struck my heart, and I cried through the whole thing. By the end of it, I got on my knees and forgave the men that killed my daughter. The thing was, what made sense is that if you have hate and you don't forgive, it's like you drinking poison and expecting them to die. It kills you. And so when I forgave him, and the pastor said, okay, this is not a one and done. You can't, you just walk away and you're all new. He gave me 8 scriptures that all dealt with forgiveness. And if you can't forgive, God can't forgive you. So I read those every day, and that was his prescription. I read them every day and read the Bible, and I came to every service every weekend. I mean, I was here through all the services. At that time, we were doing 3 services or something like that. Yeah. And, but the key is, the day I forgave, I slept through the night.
Freedom. Freedom.
Freedom.
Kathy, so you've got the loop tape playing, and God does something very special for you to help you or lead you into forgiveness. Can you walk us through that?
Our God is merciful, and he is gracious. And knowing how he created me, and that knowing that I had these horrific pictures in my head, he gave me another picture. And this picture was different. This picture was of a hand holding a gun, and the name of the man that killed our daughter was on the gun. And he told me, he said, now, daughter, I want you to understand. The man that killed your daughter was just the gun. He was just the weapon. The hand that pulled the trigger of that gun was Satan. And you need to forgive the sinner and put this sin at the feet of the enemy of Satan. Yeah. And when I understood that, it was like a light bulb, a revelation go off in my head. And I understood that I didn't have to try to forgive him, that I didn't have to try and figure it out on my own. He'd already told me. He was just a pawn. He was just a broken man, just like I'm a broken person. Yeah. And God forgave me a lot of sin. And it made it easier to forgive him as just a broken man. Did it happen overnight? No. And it took a long time for me to figure out how to get rid of the pictures in my head. But he gave me the wisdom to figure that out too. Yeah. And yeah, that was the start of healing.
I love that what God used is the story, the narrative, that it frames up all of our life, including these moments that are unexplainable. And God took you back to go, okay, let's put it in the context of the narrative. And there is an enemy, and he is very real, and he is out to cause as much destruction as he can. Yep. And in your life, the enemy has showed up this way. And I love that God's graciousness to go, hey, this is where you need to let the anger and the hatred and let it all sit there, and let me bring healing and wholeness. And I just love that journey that you had within that. I also just, as we've got to chat and walk through, like, I don't know if you know this or not, I was telling Kyle this, you guys meeting them in 2008, seeing what God did in 2010, and as I look out today, knowing the amount of lives that have been impacted by Charlie and Kathy at this church in the ministries they've been in, because there was a moment where they went, hey, I'm going to lay this down at the feet of Jesus and see if he's willing to heal. And all of a sudden I got super excited today, and I haven't even told you guys this yet. I got super excited in between services today going, can you imagine that if what you walked into the church with, God's helped you heal and walk through, but you've become conduits to everybody else, that if just a handful of us, let alone all of us, can you imagine the lives that are impacted when we let Jesus do what he does best? when we let him bring us to freedom. And so I would love, obviously we're here today, what encouragement do you have, or what advice do you have for someone in taking that step of forgiveness or releasing? Letting go is probably a better language for it.
Let go. Let go. You know, what I experienced was huge. And some of you may not have, that severe a story, or some may, but whatever it is, let it be your David and Goliath moment. The problem is Goliath, and you, through Jesus, can conquer that, just like David did. But you have to surrender and give it up. You're bigger than the problem. You're bigger than that. God is bigger than that. So you just, if we could have any prayers answered, it would be that some of you would be able to let that go today and experience what we've experienced. It's like, I don't know how many of you have backpacked or done that type of thing, but carrying a 100-pound ruck and you start getting rid of stuff. And maybe it's a whole stack of stuff, but it gets lighter. And pretty soon you feel a freedom, and then you can let go, and then you can help others let go, and that's the key.
Yeah, it's beautiful.
Yeah.
Kathy, any last thoughts, word of advice? I love the pick Goliath, so pick your Goliath.
Yeah.
What about you? Any last thoughts on letting go?
Our church is wonderful for having a wraparound effect, if you let it. There's life groups, guys. Use them. Have somebody next to you that can walk through your pain. You try to do it alone, and you're too vulnerable to the enemy. You really are. So life groups. Go through a grief share class, or 2 or 3. If you're a veteran or a first responder, and you're carrying something that you weren't meant to carry past the cross, then find one of those groups. Do Mighty Oak Warriors. Do Reboot Combat, Reboot First Responder. There's a new one coming out that's Reboot for trauma, just regular trauma. There's courses here. Check into them, step into them. Let people that have walked through it already help you to navigate it.
I love that. You weren't meant to carry it past the cross. Such a good line. I am so grateful for you guys. Thank you for pouring yourself out. I know you're tired. I know 3 services spread out the way we do it. I know that, but I'm just super, super grateful. Can we give them a hand? Thank Charlie and Kathy. As they're exiting, one of the beautiful redemption parts of their story is they adopted their granddaughter and got to raise her. And she's a beautiful young lady, and it's a testimony of what God can do. So when the moon landing took place, there was 2 people on the lunar module. And as they landed, there was protocol. And protocol was that the commanding officer, which was Neil Armstrong, should stay, because he ranked higher, should stay on the lunar module, and Buzz should be the one that went out and stepped on the moon first. But you know the story as Neil Armstrong was the first man on the moon. Well, what happened is the seating assignment put Neil next to the door, and it put Buzz on the other side. And so after testing, they tried to get Buzz to be able to climb across Neil and get out of the door to be the first person on the moon. And every time with the bulky suit, it would damage the lunar module, and it became unsafe for the mission. And so a decision was made that Neil would be the first one to step on the moon. Well, you can imagine 20 minutes later, Buzz Aldrin gets to step on the moon. As that happens and they return back to Earth and it's all captured and people saw it, and Buzz began to just toe the party line of, hey, I can't believe I got to go to the moon. I can't believe I got to be the second person I'm in such a small club of humanity that got to, and behind closed doors where it was hidden, his first wife, Joan, said that he was devastated, that he never got over it. It had Michael Collins, who stayed on the CSM that orbited the moon while they were down on the moon. Michael Collins talks about this idea that Buzz always resented not being first more than he appreciated being second. And the story of Buzz, and I don't say that to throw shade on Buzz or anything like that, but it's a picture of what resentment can do. Because you can imagine when they landed back on Earth, they did a tour of 29 cities and 24 countries and 100 million people. And guess how it was announced? Oh, they were the men that walked on the moon. But when Neil was announced, the first man on the moon, which just built more and more resentment. Hey, I wonder in your life, what are you missing? In Buzz's case, he missed that he got to walk on the moon. What are you missing in your life that God has given you that's an amazing gift? But if you're not careful, resentment and hatred and ego and bitterness will all come in and steal it. And you'll miss what God's put right in front of you. And so as we were talking as a church team and figuring out the weekend, somebody said, hey, John, what's your takeaway? What's your action step? I said, the only one I got is cheesy, man. It's done at every church thing. And they're like, who cares? If people find freedom, why do we care? And so on your chair today, there was a piece of paper. And you should have got a pencil along with your piece of paper. And I'm going to give you a couple of moments because we don't want to miss what's in front of us. But I'm just going to give you these moments to sit with the Holy Spirit, sit with God himself, sit as the leper in front and say, if you are willing, you can make me clean. And what you need to hear today is Jesus is saying, I am willing, be clean. And so on that paper, you're just going to jot down, what are your Goliaths in Charlie's language? What is it you're carrying that you were never meant to carry past the cross? What is it you're hiding that you just need to be vulnerable before God today and go, God, in an act of honesty, humility, vulnerability, transparency, here are the things that I need to let go. Why? Because you have to let them go to live and step into all that God has for you. So the next moments are yours. And then what we're going to do is once you've written your list or whatever it is, you can fold it. And on your way out, we're going to practice. You're going to drop them in a box on your way out. And we're going to physically let go of them today as we walk with Jesus. So the next moments are yours. And then we'll close together. God, we're so grateful this morning. Thank you for holy moments like these. Thank you for moments where we get to see ourselves and picture ourselves at the feet of you. God, I pray over our church family that in a posture of humility and a posture of honesty and vulnerability, God, as we hold these things before you, that we try to hide, and yet today you are bringing to light. Would we hear your words, I am willing, be clean. God, would today be a marker, a monument of the beginning of the road of forgiveness, the beginning of the road of releasing and letting go of hatred and anger and ego and pride that goes along with it, God, in every form. God, today would be a day when we let go to you and we thank you that the cross paid for every single one of these. Thank you for forgiveness that we find in you. Thank you for loving us first. God, thank you that grace surrounds us and mercy overwhelms us. Thank you for loving us We're just so grateful today, and it's in your name. Everybody said, amen.